Welcome to the Second Bite Podcast, where we talk with top entrepreneurs and CEOs about creating valuable companies through creative transactions. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome back to the Second Bite Podcast. We have a terrific episode today. I'm excited to talk with Matt Diteljan. Matt is the founder and the CEO of Glacier. Matt, so happy to have you with us.
Todd, really excited to be here.
It is going to be great. We're going to walk down, and I haven't done one of these in a while, but Matt and I just recently closed a transaction for Glacier. The acquiring company NextGrad. We did what I think is a great transaction. It'll be great to kind of unpack it. Right before we jump in, though, I do want to thank our friends, our sponsor, the good folks at TeamShares. TeamShares is a really good private equity group based out of New York. They're a unique company because they do complete buyout of retiring owners. It's a really interesting model. Anybody that's listening that wants to learn more about it, you can go to teamshares.com or you can reach out to me and I'll walk you through that. So thanks to them. Matt, you and I have been at it for a year together. I don't know what it's going to be like now that we're not, but congratulations on your transaction, first of all.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you. Yeah, it was a long, hard road, but really excited to get over the finish line. And it's going to be weird not having you in my life on a daily basis.
I know. It's they are all of the roads. Some are longer than others. They're all windy and twisty and difficult and hard and all those things. So I'd like to kind of unpack that. So Glacier was sold to a company called NextGrad. And as we get through this, listeners will see how really good of a conversation or a combination that was. I want to go all the way back to the beginning. You and I met because Grayson LaFrenz was kind enough to introduce us. And for anybody that hasn't listened to Grayson's episode, Grayson is the founder and the CEO of Power Digital. That's a great listen as well. But take me all the way back to what you were actually thinking about, Matt, that got you to the point that, geez, maybe I really should consider a transaction for my business to accelerate my growth, to take chips off the table, to do all those things that entrepreneurs think about when they think about transaction.
Sure. Yeah, it goes back years now. You know, I've kind of been on the fence of should I sell, should I not sell for probably 3 years or so. And the last time where I kind of made the decision, like, okay, I think it's time to really put this on the market and move on, was probably around COVID, where I got really pulled back into the business in a really big way. And it was, you know, when things were not looking good and there was a lot of uncertainty in what was going on. And I was right in the day-to-day again. And I was just like, man, I don't want to do this anymore. And I just also realized that I wanted to take some chips off the table at that point. And so
and given what's a ballpark size of the business?
We're you know, greater than 5 million and less than 10
in terms of revenue.
And yeah.
So it's a valuable business, right? It's multi-millions in terms of value.
Yeah.
Did that add to the pressure a little bit when you kind of got back into it real hands-on, that you realized, wow, I got something here that I don't want to just poof and have it go away? Or were you never concerned about that?
No, that was certainly a concern, because I had taken on a considerable loan to buy out my partner, you know, 5 years ago or something like that. And so when COVID all hit, I had this considerable loan on the business. And so if the company went to zero, I would lose not only the company, but all my personal assets too, because I had personal guarantees on it.
Sure.
And I was the sole owner at that point. And, you know, so it was like all of my finances on the table. And so it was extremely stressful. And I just kind of realized I don't like having all of my chips on the table. I actually think it makes me make worse decisions. And I'm way too risk averse with all my chips on the table. And so it was around that time where I just decided, I got to make a change here. I don't want to continue doing this where, you know, because I've been at it for 10 years.
Right.
This year will be the 11th year in business. And it just made me realize that I wanted to after talking to some friends about some of the options that were out there, where I can take some chips off the table and really not have all of the accountability on my shoulders and still be part of the ride. Because I always have believed in Glacier, and I always believe that, I still do, that especially with NextGrad now, it's going to be an even more exciting adventure. But I realized that I could take my chips off the table, not be the one who's got all the accountability on my shoulders, and still see the company ascend to glory. So it just, once I started hearing about some of these options, that's when I was like, I don't really just want to be the sole owner anymore. And I don't want to be so involved in the day-to-day anymore. So that's when I made the decision.
Yeah. Give us a quick description of Glacier and who you serve and what you do for them.
Sure. So Glacier is a youth marketing company. We specialize in advertising good things to kids, I always like to say. So things like higher education, health and wellness, career opportunities. And really what our flagship product was is high school advertising. So we place ads for colleges and universities or health and wellness organizations in high schools on their walls all across Canada and in about 30 states in the US as well. And that high school
1,400 schools in total, right? 1,500?
A little over 1,800 now.
1,800 schools.
Yeah.
So one way to think about it would be you have quote unquote billboards inside of high schools promoting whatever is going to happen next for kids, whether it be college or profession or wellness or what have you.
Yes, that's a great way to think about it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so when you decided, all right, let me start to explore, how did you, I don't think I've ever asked you, but how did you find or get connected to Grayson? What was your first steps there?
Yeah, Grayson and I met through the Entrepreneurs Organization, actually. That was a number of years ago, 5 or 6 years ago or something like that, where it was in the earlier stages of his company with Power Digital, and they were just, on a rocket ship. It seemed like every time I talked to them, it seemed like they had another 10,000 square feet in their office. I was like, holy smokes, man, what is going on over there at Power Digital? And so him and I just kind of stayed connected, and we actually engaged them to do a project for us. And then him and I just kind of, maintain this relationship. And then he's really morphed into more of an advisor and mentor. And I've always, tapped him on the shoulder and asked for advice. And we actually entered more of a formal advisor relationship a couple years ago. And it was through that relationship too, where I started seeing, what we would have to do to really become a leader in digital advertising. And it was through many conversations with Grayson that I also started realizing, I think it's time for me to move on here. And it's time to get some other, ownership in here. And I think it'll be better. It'll be best for me, best for the business, best for everybody. So it was also through Grayson's counsel that really helped me get to the decision of it's time to sell.
So when we started, or let's say before we got started, how much of your business was digital and how much was what I would call billboards in high schools?
Yeah, before COVID, we were probably 70% billboards in high schools and then 30% digital. Now we're probably about 50-50. Mm-hmm. The advent of COVID really increased our digital advertising substantially because all the schools were closed. So digital advertising spiked a lot, but we're probably around 50-50 now.
So when we started, and to put it in context, this is February of 23. We closed our transaction, your transaction this month. We got engaged December of 21. There was about 14 or so months to get us there in a long and winding road, which we'll talk about. But before we got started, what do you think, looking back now, what do you think was something that you underestimated much more than you should have? And what surprised you the most about the process?
Probably the amount of time. I had heard people say, oh, it could take anywhere from, 4 months on the fast side to 12 months on the long side. And I was like, oh, we're not a huge company. It should be a pretty quick process. So I thought it would happen pretty quickly. So the length of time was shocking. I mean, it's and I think the other thing was just like the the emotional roller coaster was also another one. There was, it kind of goes from like all quiet on the Western Front where nothing's happening to just turmoil and in the trenches real fast. Like the nature of the work is just like nothing, sprint for 4 days.
Right.
And then like have to make huge decisions on short timelines really quick.
Yeah.
And so that, I think that was surprising too. I wasn't expecting that kind of intensity and the pace of that. But then the other probably more interesting challenge was just keeping it quiet. Like it's the most important thing in my life, but I can't tell pretty much anybody.
Because you own 100% of Glacier.
I owned 100% of Glacier. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And like anyone who's a CEO, you had a really good management team, people that have been with you for a long period of time that you trusted quite a bit.
Yeah.
That you didn't want to upset the apple cart until we knew that we had something.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So elaborate more on that.
Yeah. It was a decision I made early on about not telling anyone on the team and really only bringing in senior level executives on an as needed basis. And it's just because I heard some horror stories of people that had, been fully transparent with their team from day one. And then they get close to a close and then it falls apart. And then the whole team's distracted. And then they started again, and it was just like, and I experienced that too. Like, deals are very, very tenuous right up until the last day sometimes. And so I just kind of made the decision that it was probably just going to be a distraction for the majority of the team, and no deals really final until, that final wire transfer sent. And so I just decided not to share it with anyone on the team except for senior leadership on an as needed basis. And so I don't think I brought in my senior leaders until, after the LOI was signed and we're, into due diligence. So, right. And then on top of that, I mean, can't tell friends or lots of family or like, basically anybody, because especially where I'm from, Calgary, it's a small city and it's a pretty tight knit community. And so if you tell one person, the probability of getting back to my employees is relatively high. So I really told nobody. And so, this thing that's the most important thing in my life that I'm spending a ton of time on, I can't really tell anybody. So it's almost like this like double life I've been living for the past year.
And so talk just for a minute, because I think it's interesting and I know you're introspective. Talk a little bit about how much time, people say, well, okay, so here's where we are. I'm just going to block it out. Is it possible to block it out and just say focus on other things, or is it, constantly with you?
You mean the deal? Like, is it possible not to think about it?
The process, the negotiation, the letters of intent, the diligence.
Yeah. I will say in the entire year process, the only time I didn't think about the deal was probably a few days I was at Burning Man. That was like the only time in the year that I didn't think about the deal. But other than that, it's just kind of like the analogy I like to tell people is it's like you go to a roulette table and you take out your entire life savings and put it on red, and then you sit there and watch the wheel spin for a year. That's kind of what it's like. And so it's hard not to think about it. I mean,
so, and I will say this, so we'll go back now into our process. So we started in January, we put a deck together, got your financials right. We did all that kind of stuff, right? We're well organized. Mm-hmm. And I think, as I'd mentioned to you, I had been through the marketing to college students process a couple of years earlier. So I knew quite a few buyers from that old process. And so we pretty quickly had a good list. I had relationships with a lot of folks. And so we signed our engagement in December. We had a LOI negotiated, ready for signature in March. Mm-hmm. And we were back and forth. We negotiated and got it, I will say now in hindsight, almost good enough. And then you decided, I can't do it. Take me through that again, because that's a difficult decision that in long hindsight turned out really well. But take me through that and as much as you remember about it.
Yeah. So I remember we had two groups at the table that were bidding up on each other. And I remember that process was exciting in itself. I don't remember how long that took. Maybe it was a couple of weeks, but that was wild. Just seeing like the almost live auction happening where these two groups were bidding up on the deal. And I remember that was just so exciting. And then once we got down to the final group, and the one that basically, because one dropped out and they said we're not willing to go any higher than this, and then they dropped out, and so there was one left, and it was basically their final offer. And I remember thinking at the time, oh, this is, because there was a bidding war, and we ran this process, that this was the best offer. So therefore, I'll take it. This is the best offer that's on the market. So I'm going to go ahead and take it.
It was a good strategic fit, right? These guys were in the college marketing space. They were in the U.S. It matched up North America, right? Canada with the U.S. So on paper, it was a great strategic fit. And then from a financial perspective, we have the validation of two competing against each other. So we think we knew we had the right deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Go from there.
Yeah. And it was a great fit. And I still think if we would have done that deal, it probably would have been a really good fit. There was a lot of complementary things. And I think everyone would have likely been happy at the end of the day. But I think because it happened so quickly and we had the final offer in place, and then it was literally the day before I was about to sign it. And how I typically like to make decisions of this size is I like to make the decision, sleep on it, wake up the next day, and see how I feel about the decision. And oftentimes, and I don't know, how deep you want to get into psychology and spiritual beliefs, but I really believe that dreams are a great guide, because the conscious brain can only take in so much information, and the unconscious brain is taking in 90 to 95% more information. And at night, when the unconscious brain is let out of its cage and it's let to roam wild and free, that's a lot of times where dreams try to communicate to the conscious mind something that it might have missed. And that night, I don't remember my dreams very often. Maybe like once a month, once a quarter type thing. But that night when I made the decision, I had a dream, and I won't go into all the details of the dream, but suffice it to say that the dream basically told me if I took this deal, I would regret it. And so then I woke up, and it was kind of a jarring dream, and I was like, what am I missing here? And it was just like such a strong, overwhelming emotion. So I went and redid my analysis, looked at my spreadsheets, and I just kind of realized, I was like, man, if I accepted this deal, the amount of cash I would get up front is not significantly more than the dividend I took out last year, and I'd be losing entire control. And so I just kind of realized, I was like, I'm better off keeping the business. If this is the best offer out there, I'm actually better off not selling. And so that's when I went to you and I said, Todd, like, it's just not going to do it. It's a great business. I'm better off keeping it. And so that's when you and I talked, and I remember that, I can't remember how but you basically said, well, give me something I got to go back to them with and say, if they hit this, then we'll do the deal. So I went back and I was like, okay, fine. So I kind of went through my analysis, my numbers again, and figured out the taxes and everything. And I came back to you with a number which was way higher. And I remember you being like, well, Matt, I think I've been meaning to throw this in your face, and I'm ready. I'm excited that I can do it now. Do you remember what you told me after I went back to you and I said, this is my number? You're like, well, I don't think they're going to take it. And I was like, well, this is my number. And then they didn't take it. And then you said, well, Matt, I think the market's spoken. I don't think there's any point in us talking anymore, or something to that effect. You said the market's spoken.
Yeah, and here's what I would say about that, because I remember that. And so different from the other side. That's why these conversations are so great. I remember going to bed that night thinking, this is a great fit. I did great work. We got, we spoke to a bunch. We narrowed it down. We had a couple. So now we know. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I tell people is it's very, very hard to really understand up front is the clarity that you get from the process.
Yeah.
So I was 100% certain that the market had spoken and told us what the value was. Mm-hmm. And as disappointed that I was that you decided this is not the right fit, it's at that moment that you get clarity. And then it's only at that moment can you make a really well-informed decision. And we try to give people as best guidance from past transactions as to what I think they could expect, right? But it's not until you get there with all of the emotions that swirl around that to know what it will actually feel like when you're there. And when people decide to go forward, they're usually 100% certain because of that. And your buyer is definitely much more locked in, right? Which is super helpful as you go through due diligence. So I remember that. I remember that about the same way, but through my vision as opposed to through your vision. Mm-hmm. And I do remember being proud of myself for not overreacting to you telling me about your dream and this is why we're not doing the deal.
Yeah.
I do remember saying, "Listen, man, we talked to all the potential players. This is what happened. Blah blah blah." And then, literally, it was about a week later, and one of the groups that we reached out to and I spoke with reached back to me. Literally, I think it was like a week later.
I don't even think it was that long. I honestly think it was like the next day. It was within really quick.
Yeah, because you and I talked about, okay, what are we going to do? We've talked to the market. And then let's say it was the next day or the day afterwards. And they called me, the banker that represented this group, and said, "Hey, are those guys still available?" And it was one of those kind of mystical things like you talked about. And I remember saying, not only is he available, I remember specifically saying to him, but we have clarity around a deal that will work. And I'm certain of my client because I saw him say no to something at this level. So this level will not do it. It has to be above that level. And that's when we started our first conversation with NextGrad. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit about that, because the economics are what they are, and the economics met what your needs were. But a really important thing for you was a landing spot for your team, and you rolled forward a good chunk. So, what that investment would look like in the future, and you're believing in the NextGrad team, which seems like a very good one. Tell me about that process, because now we're back to square one.
Yeah. And I remember because I had this goal of, the amount of money that I wanted to get and all that kind of stuff. And I had it written on my wall. I had it on the background of my phone. And I remember after I walked away from that first deal, I was like, okay, well, I'm keeping the business. And so I just took all that down, because I was like, okay, that's it. The sale's over. I'm taking it all down, and did some other things. And then, literally the next day, hey Matt, you're not going to believe this. Someone has came to the table and said they'll give you exactly what you want. I was like, no freaking way. Oh my God. Here we go again. We're back in it.
Yeah.
And then I had known about them through our industry, because, the high school advertising industry is it's not a very big space. There's not a lot of people working in it. And so if you're a high school advertising company, we're probably going to find out about you pretty quickly. And so we had known about them, and when they came to the table, it was really exciting, because this is kind of, this is a vision or a direction that we have gone, which is the high school advertising, and just seeing, their focus on it, and immediately after talking to their CEO, Michael, I had never met someone so passionate about out-of-home advertising before. I just couldn't believe it. I was like, this guy, he is so passionate about this. It's unbelievable. And him and his brother, they're the two founders of the company, and they reminded me a lot about myself and my old business partner, my old co-founder. Just the way that they're gritty and just grinding. They started during COVID. They started an out-of-home advertising company in probably the worst time in history to start an out-of-home advertising company. And they had, brought a lot of incredible people to the table through both their investors and their team members, and the amount of schools that they had already brought on board was just tremendous. And so it was in those first few conversations, and then I just started seeing that we have a lot of value alignments as well about how it's always been important to us, the ethical component of it, and only advertising things to kids that we deem to be ethically good. And we were very aligned on that point. And so it just seemed like everything was really just aligned from those first few conversations. And the fact that they were willing to come to the table and, give me exactly what I wanted, it was just a great fit.
And it was a great fit for them too. If you think about what you described in them now to pick up 1,500 high schools, both in the US and Canada, doing the things that you're doing with the profitability that you're doing and the team and the systems and everything else, was a great win for them.
Yeah.
You had decided though, part of the reason for you to do this process is because you wanted to move on to whatever's next in your life, right? You're willing to do a transition period for a few months or several months, but you don't want to be full-time, continually active in the business, although you're happy to have an investment in the business. How do you think that impacted the things that we considered in your thinking around the deal?
Yeah. In terms of me not wanting to have a full-time role or
yeah, and just some of the folks that we considered, because there were some in there that you always get a little bit spooked if the guy's leaving, right?
Right. Yeah. And actually, to touch on your other point about the teams as well, that was another big thing about this, because there's been a lot of people on my team that have been with me for some time. And I really wanted to make sure that they were taken care of. The last thing I'd want to see is me do this deal and then a new buyer come in and just slash everybody and cut everybody's jobs. That would just be such a heartbreak that I just would not, that was just something I didn't want to do. And so that's why this was also just such a good fit, because I knew that, they're a smaller company. NextGrad has fewer employees than us. So and for the dreams and ambitions that Michael has, they're going to need a lot of people. And so, and they were always very clear from day one, like about how they're, going to treat our employees very well. And they have no plans of laying anybody off. And so that was just a great fit. And so what was your second question there again? It was about...
It was just about the fact that you were going to, because you were going to move on, how that complicated or not.
Yeah, right. And that was something really important to me early on. And there was a couple of one of the other offers in particular, it was basically a job. It was a job with an earnout. Yes, it was, an impressive company and all these things. But it was basically, tying me into a job and a huge earnout. And I was just not interested in that. Right. And so this was a completely different deal where, there's still an earnout piece, but on a percentage basis, it's significantly smaller. Yeah. And we were very upfront from day one about my involvement in the business and the amount of meetings I attend and everything like that. And they're totally fine with that. And that was the other great fit, where I was very upfront from day one about, what I am doing, what I intend to do, or what I'm willing to do after the deal. And they were totally fine with it because of the management team that we have and their belief in the management team and their ability to run the business. So I'm not as essential to the day-to-day. Right. Yeah.
Now, and then, so with NextGrad, they have outside investors, and you had kind of like a double level of complexity, because we were negotiating with NextGrad, but then they were also negotiating to get investment in, and who they wanted to take that from. And through the efforts on their end, they had a couple of different groups that they could have selected from. And that added complication, because that group had lawyers and NextGrad had lawyers. And how did you think about how that impacted the deal?
Yeah. And then you're also missing a big detail, which is that it was a cross-border transaction. So there's also American and Canadian lawyers. So the amount of people that were at the table sometimes was just tremendous. And so, Michael and I, we talked about this post-close, and we were like, well, that was a pretty intense first transaction for both of us, because he'd never bought a company. I'd never sold a company. And so here we are at the table of this, international, pretty complex deal where, he's pulling an investor at the same time. We're doing this cross-border transaction. So it was a pretty complex deal, I think, at a lot of times.
It was. And let's give a shout out to Derek and Nick at Cars Callan, because in many respects, those guys kept the deal together, saved the deal. They were terrific. So if anyone's ever looking to do a deal in Canada, those are your guys, because because not only did they understand tax law, they understood, structure, they understood cross-border. They were terrific all along. Would you agree?
Yeah, they were phenomenal. They were absolutely phenomenal. They were a great team to have them on board. And yeah, that was the challenge. Is we once we kind of negotiated a deal with Michael, and we were all happy with it, and then we brought the investor in, and at that point, I thought it was just going to be like okay, great, we got the investor, sign the documents, and we're done. And then once we finally got the documents back from the investor, which took some time, they were just not at all what we were expecting. And there was, certain changes in there, and I won't go into the detail there, but there were certain changes where it was basically a deal breaker on our end. And it just wasn't a fit. And, here we had been negotiating with this investor for, a month or two. And that's when we decided to pass on the investor, which again was a pretty bold move, I think, looking back.
Well, and so if you're okay with it, there was one particular, there's a bunch of, when you negotiate a deal, there's a bunch of things, right? Mm-hmm. And one of them, the particular investor said that in the event that certain things happen, he could take all the equity back from NextGrad, from Matt, from everybody, mm-hmm. which sounded overreaching and unfair to us. And they wouldn't move off of it, and we wouldn't move off of it. And essentially, we got to the point where it was a deal breaker. Mm-hmm. So to the credit to NextGrad particularly, and their banker as well, they went out because they had others lined up that were interested, and others that really saw how strong this combination would be, where they had somebody else step in that was, let's say, more reasonable around that point and probably most other points. And I think will be a much better long-term investor for that business. Would you agree?
100%. And it's almost it's a situation of the sweet isn't as sweet without the sour, where because we had an investor that was just such a different flavor, having this new investor come in and then they then give us their terms, and they're so reasonable. Yeah. And it was great working with him. It was just like, wow, this is
night and day. It was night and day.
A completely night and day difference. And he just brings with him a wealth of experience, and he's going to be more involved. And like, it was just such a perfect fit. And then it was at that point that the final click really just happened. And that's when I knew, I was like, this is something special. We are really doing something special here. It's really cool.
And it's really, I think, very early stages. Michael and Asher have been successful to date with this asset in their possession. I think they're really going to hit a rocket ship as well, which should be great for everybody. And I think, because here's going to be my closing question, there's a lot of, kind of lessons learned. And I was going to ask you, now looking back, what would you have done differently? But a lot of the things I think you can't see from the starting line. Right? You only see when you're in the middle of the fight, so to speak. But looking back on it now, is there anything that you would have adjusted your thinking around as we went into this?
Yeah, it's so hard to say that, because I got everything I wanted and then some. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it might not have happened in the way I wanted it to, but it happened in the way I needed it to.
Right.
But I think I would have just gone into it with expectations, different expectations on time. I thought it was going to happen faster, and this was I think we pushed back the timeline like 6 or 7 times, maybe even more. I think our first closing date was in like September, and
I want to be kind of careful on that for a couple of reasons. First of all, we. In hindsight, I would say we could have closed it in a shorter period of time if you would have taken a lesser deal, right? One that you didn't feel comfortable with, one that you didn't like, and all that kind of stuff. And that's what I meant about the clarity that comes with it.
Yeah, yeah.
We could have taken a worse investor in hindsight and closed in September or October, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, and I would also say, because maybe somebody listening would come away and say, geez, Matt was just difficult and rigid. And you were really anything but that. But I think the practicality of some of the risk in the deal and what you wanted to get out of the deal, you were consistent with all the way through. I think I think you showed flexibility in terms of what you wanted to accomplish. And I think when you saw the owners of NextGrad, you knew that those guys were somebody you could trust with a pretty significant rollover to turn it into something, much bigger and much better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And you're right. The reason why it took longer is because we were holding out for the best fit, and I knew that waiting a little bit longer or, saying no to certain things would always translate well in the long term, which is what ended up happening. Absolutely.
Yeah. And, that one was longer than usual. It was certainly frustrating at times, like all deals are. Getting a deal across the finish line is just an extraordinary feeling, right? It really is. And so congratulations to you and to NextGrad and to the team that helped make all that. It was great for me to be a part of it. And I'm glad that Grayson put us together. And I'm interested to see what will be the next chapter of your professional life going forward. It'll be fun to watch.
Thank you, Todd. And thanks for all your help in the process too. And it was one of the greatest achievements I've had to date. There's not too many things that are 10 years in the making. So it felt incredible to get over the finish line. Yeah.
And it's nice to get the validation from a buyer and from the market and from everything else. So Matthew, best of luck to you going forward. Thanks for sharing the experience with us. To reach out to Matthew, his contact information is in the show notes. You can go to secondbitepodcast.com. You should go there. You can listen to Grayson's episode as well. And maybe a year or 2 or 5 from now, when NextGrad has an eventual exit, we'll have more to talk about and we can update everybody that's listened to this episode.
Absolutely. Thanks, Todd.
Great. Matt, thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Second Bite Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.